Welcome back to the broadcast. Let's get into this here because I know you took part this week in that subcommittee on national security hearing, and you heard testimony on Russia's destabilizing activity throughout Eastern Europe. So what all did you learn, and what is at stake for the U.S. in any potential Russian invasion?
Well, Alex, thank you for having me, as always. What we learned in our national security subcommittee hearing this week is that Putin has been trying to lay a pretext for invasion for months now. They have been planning misinformation and deploying misinformation and disinformation, all the while amassing troops, as you're seeing on the screen now, all around the borders of Ukraine, while the United States and our allies, led by President Biden, have been coming to the negotiating table and trying to engage Russia in diplomacy. The vice president's absolutely right. People who live in a world of nations have the right to choose their own form of government, and there is no leader, no person who has the right to decide the destiny of anyone in another country against their will. And that is what Putin is attempting and on the cusp of executing, and he will be met, as President Biden said, with certain swift and severe consequences facing a united NATO and our allies.
Okay, let's turn to Florida, your state there. A ban on abortion after 15 weeks now heads to a Florida Senate committee meeting after passing the state's House of Representatives. That bill, which Governor Ron DeSantis supports, could be passed by both chambers as early as next week. And this bill somewhat mirrors the Mississippi law that is now before the U.S. Supreme Court. So what kind of impact will this law have on your constituents? And does this make the court's future decision on the fate of Roe v. Wade even more critical?
It would have a devastating impact on my constituents, just like in the other two states this week that are considering 15-week abortion bans, Arizona and West Virginia would. What the Republicans are doing here in our state, led by Ron DeSantis, is that they have no agenda. They have no plan to lower prescription drug costs, no plan to expand access to health care, no plan to make sure that we can continue the development of our robust job market. All they have is culture war. And so what they're doing is they're trying to tell women and their families when they can have families. They did this in Florida in the dead of night, by the way, because, of course, that this doesn't stand up to the light of day. And Ron DeSantis is running the communist dictator playbook from the get-go. I have constituents who fled Venezuela and Cuba, and what they're facing now under a governor like Ron DeSantis is he's essentially prohibiting protest. He's telling schools and teachers what words they can say through the Don't Say Gay legislation. The list goes on. And it's just absolutely outrageous, unacceptable. And we're going to continue to fight this legislation, push back at the polls, and make sure that there's accountability for leaders like this who want to tell women when they can have families.
Any way to stop the Don't Say Gay law? I mean, that's what it's been called by opponents. Any way to stop that from becoming law?
It appears that it is rocketing through the Florida legislature. And again, it is right from the communist dictator playbook, where I have constituents who fled countries where they are told what they can say, when they can say it, where protest is limited, where there is limitations on when they can have families. And what they're doing here to the LGBTQ kids who are in schools are making it more likely that there is suicide, mental health challenges, and devastating consequences to restricting what can be talked about and having these kids see who they are reflected in what they learn. The Trevor Project has said that that it is more likely that children who face laws like this are going to see more suicides. We see a 23% reduction in suicides when LGBTQ kids can see who they are and are respected in schools. And that's the opposite of what's going on here. And those deaths and that harm to LGBTQ kids will be right in Ron DeSantis and Republicans' laps if they pass this bill.
Look, I have to ask, given both these bills, what kind of message is being sent to your state and to the country at large? I mean, what is the image of Florida because of these measures?
Again, this is a state that is led by a governor who essentially wants to clamp down on freedom of expression, on who wants to enact what is really the socialist dictatorial policies that our constituents fled other countries for. And they haven't, it's because they have no agenda, Alex. They have no agenda to actually make people's lives better. And so all they have is a play to their nativist base, where they're trying to motivate their own core Trump base to go to the polls and try to remain in office or elect more people like them. And that's not the direction this country should be going. We have a president in Joe Biden who isn't Putin's patsy like Donald Trump was. We have a Democratic majority that is turning things around, bringing us out of COVID, creating more jobs, have a massively robust economy. And what did Republicans do? They voted no, time and time again. They have no agenda. All they have is culture war, and it's revolting and dangerous.
Let me ask about Politico, which is reporting that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is warning members that unless they more forcefully confront what they're calling the GOP's alarmingly potent culture war attacks, they risk losing significant ground to Republicans in the midterms. And as a former chair of the DNC, how do you think Democrats should approach this heading into the midterms?
Well, I'll tell you how I approach it. I approach it by talking about how I voted for the American Rescue Plan. And Republicans voted no. And we fought in that legislation to make sure that during COVID, over the last 2 years, when local governments' budgets were devastated by the impact of COVID, meaning police department budgets were devastated, I voted to add resources to those cities, and Republicans voted no. So it's Republicans who have voted to defund the police. It's Republicans that are engaging in the kind of legislation that would limit people's ability to decide when to have a family, that are telling people what they can say and not say in schools. The culture wars are being played out in Technicolor, and Democrats are pushing back every step of the way, and Republicans are trying to have a government that essentially takes over your lives and tells you what you can do, when you can do it, what you can say, when you can protest. That's not what America is all about. And that's going to be the contrast that we have coming into this election in November.
Okay, well, bring it on then. Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Bring it on, absolutely.
Bring it on. Thank you.